Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our exploration, with respect to the recent Criterion Collection releases for this year, 2021. And that brings us to that film which has been designated by Criterion in its spine numbering system under spine number 1083. This is the work from 2011, and the filmmaker is Dee Rees. And the name of this extraordinary work is PARIAH. This is the remarkable, extraordinary, and intimate film from 2011 from filmmaker Dee Rees. And it has in its exceptional, wonderful cast people like Adepero Oduye and Pernell Walker and Charles Parnell and Asha Davis and Kim Wayans and others. This is the work which is PARIAH. The film PARIAH is a story about a set of characters that are intimately portrayed. And in particular, we have this young woman named Alike, or Lee, who is a young high school student who lives in Brooklyn, New York, with her family, her younger sister, and her parents, her mother and father, played by Kim Wayans and Charles Parnell. And we see throughout the progress of the story or the film, we get to know about Alike and how this film is in many ways a type of portrayal of her own emotional and spiritual journey about discoveries, both external discoveries about the world around her, and also discoveries about herself, internal discoveries or self-discoveries. And part of that journey for Alike, and indeed also for a number of the other people that we meet along the way in this extraordinary work, part of that journey, but a very fundamentally important part of that journey for Alike, as we see it expressed in this film, is her identity and her sexuality. And so the discovery or self-discovery about who she is and her own sense of self and who she is in terms of how she relates to the world around her and the people around her, and also how that affects her and her sense of who she is as a human being. And the exploration of her sexuality is directly linked with this particular journey, both an externalized, connected journey and also an internalized self-discovery type of journey. And this exploration of her sexuality affects many parts of her life, very directly, in fact, as we see it portrayed in this film. For example, we see the way that she is feeling this sense of closeness or attraction, or a sense of, say, belonging, or feeling of wanting to get to know someone in the sense of intimacy that is also very emotional and also very physical in terms of the bases of attraction or attractiveness vis-a-vis other characters in the film. For example, the Asha Davis character, for example. And also this is reflected very much so in Alike's friendship, a very strong bond with the character of Laura, played by Pernell Walker. And we also see how a lot of these aspects are shown in terms of how Alike herself is expressing herself. For example, in the context of her school life and in her poetry, which is also a very important part of who she is and her identity. Also, it is finding expression, or perhaps to put it another way, it is finding a sense of place in which this type of expression is being either explored or challenged. It is finding expression also in how her relationships are forged between, say, her sister and also her parents, and specifically her relationship with her father, played by Charles Parnell on the one hand, and also her relationship with her mother, played by Kim Wayans on the other, the mother character being the character of Audrey. And so these form the very significant aspects or bases against which or upon which Alike is exploring and making discoveries about who she is and her sexuality, and also her place in this particular world, and how she must make certain choices in order to either establish to herself and to this world who she is, or to make certain choices that will perhaps have some kind of emotional ramifications for her going forward. So in many ways, this is a film that is about the direct, intimate, and oftentimes emotionally challenging aspects of this type of intimate exploration that, as I say, affects not just oneself or one's relationship with oneself, but also affects the relationship that one has with the people around one. And that includes one's family unit as well as one's close, intimate friends. And so this forms, I think, a very direct through line by which or upon which this self-exploration journey, as expressed through this film, Pariah, by Dee Rees, is finding form. And I think it finds that form in such an extraordinary and emotionally powerful way. This set of characters that we meet it's such a lovely, well expressed set of characters, because they all have their own human choices and distinctions and character traits that I think provide a real nuanced approach to these characters. In other words, there are no, say, villains of the piece, as it were. Let's take the example of that really powerful dynamic between mother and daughter, between Alike and her mother, Audrey, again, Adepero Oduye and Kim Wayans. Now, this relationship is one of the most dynamic, and it's a very challenging aspect of this film, and it's perhaps arguably one of the most intense sources of challenge that confronts Alike, and in fact other members of her family and other people in this close-knit community that we encounter along the way. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that Audrey, the mother character, is herself a villain. On the contrary, and I think this point is so well expressed in the Criterion Collection supplements that are included here. This portrayal of, for example, the mother figure, the Audrey figure, is so nuanced and so well balanced because, in a certain way, the human voice that is given to that particular performance does provide the sense of, perhaps from a certain emotional dimension, where a character like Audrey is coming from. Now, it might have certain ramifications and certain consequences that ultimately might lead to very difficult emotional circumstances. All the same, this film does provide a certain breadth of scope in terms of where certain characters are coming from. We might not always agree with all the ultimate choices that are made, but we do know where they are coming from. And thus, this film makes these characters human beings. And that's what I really, really admire about this film. And along that line, too, the way that this film tells this story it has been often described. It's been described by, say, the filmmakers Dee Rees and also a lot of the academic scholarship included with this particular Criterion release, the supplements, which I'll get to momentarily, the essay, etc. It's been described often as a really prime example of what is known or what is referred to as queer black cinema. And this is often used because of, or using the point that the main character, who is Alike, is a young black woman who is a student, this high school student in Brooklyn, who is a young black woman who is experiencing or making discoveries about her own sexuality. And so it is therefore been often described with such phrase. And indeed, as through that type of, say, perspective, I think the film is a powerful emotional portrait. Also, it is a powerful film in that it is also speaking to a number of universal points. And when I say universal, I mean those ideas or aspects of a particular film journey or a particular character journey that I think are so well expressed that they can, on a point of empathy, they can be, I think, understood by just about anyone. And that is one of the most powerful aspects of this film. It is telling such an intimate story about this young woman, Alike, and her feelings about how she's relating to the world, which on the one hand could be said to be her own intimate, unique, and individual story, and indeed they are. But then also, we think about all the layers and all the levels that are involved, and we see that her story becomes also, through certain degrees, the stories of others. And we see that otherness, that kinship, as it were, with other people, expressed also within the layers of this film, of course, because we see the other journeys of the characters, like Laura, like like other characters, like the Asha Davis character, etc. We see those relationships, and through those relationships, we understand that those characters are also undergoing their own similar yet different journeys. But they all have their own distinct and individual consequences and reasons as well. So we have that linkage or the kinship with other, say, related yet different journeys, but they are still journeys all the same. And then to take a step further back, we also understand that their lives and their choices have a lot to do with the life experiences and feelings and emotions that I think can be understood by just about anyone. The idea of wanting to relate to the world around us, the idea of how we can express ourselves, especially when there are maybe certain obstacles or hindrances that we might feel both psychologically and emotionally, and perhaps imposed in terms of a societal view, who knows. But in any event, there is this idea of wanting to communicate and not being able to, and trying to make that break, and oftentimes maybe the way in which, or the thing in which we are trying to communicate, or the very act of wanting to express who we are ourselves, that might hold consequences. Those consequences might be good, they might be strong and positive, or they might not be so good. They might lead to broken relationships that might not necessarily be mendable. All the same, what is the worth of that? And I think the worth, the emotional, human worth that is at the heart of this idea of expressing who we are, and the very essence of who we are, is at the heart of this film, is at the heart of the journey of all the characters, in particular the heart of the journey of the character of Alike. And in that way, and all the various the conclusions that one can reach based upon this commonality or point of commonality, I think this film Pariah operates on such a powerful universal level that can be, I think, on a point of empathy, it can touch so many people at once, because it has that emotional human power that is, I think, very, very strongly, it's very strongly created and portrayed thus creating this multi-leveled work that is a truly stroke of genius. At the very heart, always, 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 we have the drive and emotion and the force and the hurt and the pain and the confusion, as well as the confrontation and the energy and the strength that all are part of this thing that we can call human existence, or the endeavor of human existence. And that can be found in these huge changes of tumult and societal drive, or they can be found in the most intimate and the most quiet and yet the most powerfully devastating and at the same time most fundamentally liberating choices that are made by the individual. What a powerful work this is. This is the work from Dee Rees, which is called PARIAH. The Criterion Collection has released this film and is purported to be based on a 2K digital transfer of this work, Dee Rees' extraordinary film, PARIAH, and it is yet another example of what Criterion does so well and how it assembles and collects this information to supplement this particular film. And my goodness, what a great release this is. What a great film this is. And so this is the Criterion release of PARIAH. Once again, spine number 1083. If we were to speak about the supplements that are included here with this Criterion release, we have quite a number. So first off, we have a discussion, a one-on-one discussion, which is held over a Zoom call, essentially, but it's a wonderful one. This is with Michelle Parkerson and Dee Rees, and it is called Dee Rees on the Evolution of PARIAH, approximately 35 minutes. A lovely conversation because it touches upon so many aspects, both the themes of the film and also the production details of the film, as well as Dee Rees as a filmmaker and her own perspectives and her own approaches to this film and also to the other films that form part of her career up to PARIAH and then post-PARIAH. So all in all, this is a brilliant, brilliant conversation, and Michelle Parkerson brings some wonderful, lovely comments and remarks and observations and touches that lend so much to the overall conversation between these two individuals. Please check it out if you can. For example, they do talk about, or it is touched upon in terms of Dee Rees and what, in terms of the question asked of her, what could be said to be some, or who could be said to be some of her influences, both as a filmmaker and an artist. And Dee Rees provides examples both in terms of film and also in terms of literature. Alice Walker and Zora Neale Hurston and Spike Lee and also Charles Burnett and also Gloria Naylor and others. And then also she points to the cinema craft and pointing to the documentary tradition and how this is a very important aspect to her cinema filmmaking spirit, as it were, leading up to PARIAH. They also speak about the genesis or the creation of this film, PARIAH, and how it has a very complex history in terms of how it was ultimately created. So they touch upon how this was, or there was the short film, PARIAH, from 2007. And this was, of course, leading up to this short film during Dee Rees' film studies student days. And so has led up, of course, the writing of the film is what led up to the creation of the short film, and how Dee Rees was trying to write the story, which in many ways she acknowledges in this interview is her story, or there are a lot of aspects that she could say or she could acknowledge as being her own story in terms of this type of catharsis, in terms of sexual identity and discovery. There is a sense of what Dee Rees calls the story about, it's a story of a character who comes out to her family and to her friends, and what the consequences are for those relationships, but also for oneself and one's identity in this particular world, this modern day setting. So there are certain aspects which Dee Rees herself acknowledges as being part of her own story, and yet there are other aspects she acknowledges in this interview as being very separate and distinct from her own story. For instance, she talks about maybe the age that the character of Alike is in when this particular journey that she's on takes place, versus the timing in which that similar type of journey took place in Dee Rees' own life. It took place maybe a little bit later in terms of the age. And so Dee Rees looks at that and she says that she makes a type of a really interesting comparison and contrast that is also very much inherent in her own life and details of her own biography. So those details are, I think, very interesting. She also makes this really lovely comment, Dee Rees does, about this idea and how they both express it. Michelle Parkerson and Dee Rees does, about the way of expressing the intimate details of this story of this young woman, this young black woman who has these feelings, and how to best express them. And those feelings on a universal level she expresses so well, and she says about how I know who to love, but how to be is the thing. And I found this statement to be so profound, so profound. This is it. This is the thing that is part of the existences and lives of everyone. I know who I love, but how to be is the thing. And there's so much wrapped in that. There's so much this idea of the dilemmas of existence, existential dilemmas, as well as the intimate, the emotional portraits that are all at risk with every choice that we as human beings make, whether it be in the context of discoveries of our own sexuality, of our own, say, backgrounds and communities and ethnicities, etc., or maybe it's in the context of our relationships with our close family members, parents, mothers, fathers, and children, etc. In those complex, nuanced ways, a lot of our choices as human beings have with them inherently a sense of risk and what can be potentially broken or destroyed as a result of those particular choices. And this is all at the heart, or this is all part of what's being said here. Very, very profound statement from Dee Rees. And this is, I think, the spirit in which the film Pariah is being made, or the story of Pariah. And in that context, the two of them here then go into a discussion about the progress, if you will, how Pariah was this short film from 2007, and how the screenplay or the script was this very long, involved writing, in terms of this catharsis effect from the writer and artist Dee Rees, and how it had to be, from Dee Rees' point of view, condensed in order to create this short film, this graduation thesis, as it were. And then how this was worked on for a number of years afterwards, a Sundance workshop, etc. And how the story itself, the short film itself, is focusing in again on these characters, Alike and Laura, again portrayed by Adepero Oduye and Pernell Walker, and how they have the relationships with the parents, their own, the two of them, the friends, and how they have this wonderful spoken and unspoken aspects to their relationship, their questions and their jokes and their wonderful rapport about life, about aspects of, say, sex and attraction towards others, and going out. And then also part of that, too, is how this affects the relationship between Alike and her parents, and her mother in particular. And so we see very specific aspects that we can see reflected very directly in what will eventually become the feature film version of Pariah. But here we have discussions of the earlier version, the short film version And then goes into similar directions, but also the feature film, then as Dee Rees acknowledges, goes also into other directions too. So it's a very interesting discussion to see these two, or it's a very interesting discussion to hear with regard to the short film version versus the feature film version. I should say here that one of the things I would have loved to have seen with this Criterion release is maybe an inclusion of the earlier short film. That would have been really interesting. Unfortunately, we do not get any short film inclusion as part of the supplements, but at the very least, we do get an explanation and a discussion of the short film in this and in other aspects of the supplements, and we do get some clips, so we do get this sense of comparison or being able to compare. But in any event, this conversation continues. There is a discussion about the importance of poetry and identity, and here's where there's the reference to Audre Lorde, and Audre Lorde, of course, is very important in terms of how the poetry is weaved in, how the words and language are weaved in. Wherever the bird with no feet flew, she found trees with no limbs. And this leads to a wonderful discussion between the two about Zami, a new spelling of my name, and also the importance of poetry, the importance of language, the importance of words, how this is a reflection of many things. For instance, the idea of the importance of the role of, say, education as a type of one direct theme. I think also more fundamentally, too, the role of words here is so valuable and indeed essential when it comes to this idea of self-expression. Self-expression is at the heart of this film. It is about self-expression and the struggles and challenges and the results and consequences of such self-expression, whether indeed it is possible or not. And if it is indeed possible, then how it will affect your life, especially when it affects the lives of others. This is so important. And this is also why words and poetry and the act of expression and language, why these aspects are so essential with this film. And so this discussion in this realm is very important, and it leads to the idea, of course, of Dee Rees and her love of literature, her love of poetry, and also a reflection of Alike, the character, how poetry is very important to her, how it becomes her voice, or one of the voices that is expressing her very heart and soul from the beginning all the way to the end. And this is such a great way in which these two are talking about this. So, and that's a reminder of how many levels upon which this film is operating. So another brilliant turn of this great conversation. And it talks a little bit about the filmmaking style, the process, the use of different music genres, to express the various turns of character, the certain genres that are used, say, in association with the Pernell Walker character, Laura, and her relationship with Alike, and the different types of music genre that are used with respect to the Bina character, the Asha Davis character. And so this, and these are all forming different dynamics of that personal journey of Alike, which we were referring to others a while back. So this is another great example of music playing an important role, and how Dee Rees is acknowledging this in the discussion. Also the filmmaking process as well, the handheld style, also the use of the handheld style on the one hand, which could be reflective of a type of influence of the documentary tradition on the one hand, but also Bradford Young and his cinematography style, the capturing of light and the capturing of shadow, and the use of certain colors to enhance the background and the city landscapes, and the use of, say, the golden lights, the oranges, the golds, the beautiful way in which the light captures the beauty of these characters, and the close-ups on their faces as they are, say, sitting in a car and talking to each other as the light is shining through the clouds and the beautiful sky behind them, and those aspects, I think, form such a beautiful a chrysalis, if you will, or a type of wonderful visual capturing of the poetic beauty that is at the very heart of this film. And so it's wonderful to get that sense. Also, there's talk about the brownstone building and how certain levels were used in terms of production and the costume design. There is there's a real hands-on nature to the way in which the fashion choices were made, the type of handheld style, how this was in that way, an independent film spirit atmosphere in terms of the production. And so this concludes that great conversation between Michelle Parkerson and Dee Rees. Again, please check it out if you can. It's approximately 35 minutes. And then the conversations or the supplements continue on. We have a supplement approximately 28 minutes, The Cast of PARIAH. And this is described as being from February 2021. This is moderated by Jacqueline Stewart, the great Jacqueline Stewart. And we have members of the cast assembling, again via Zoom online call, but they are assembling here. We have Dee Rees as well. So we have Dee Rees and then members of the cast. So Adepero Aduye, Pernell Walker, Kim Wayans, Charles Parnell, and Asha Davis. And what a great conversation these people are having. What a great conversation. Many aspects are spoken about, and each participant is given his or her moment in terms of a particular discussion vis-a-vis Dee Rees, or anecdotes about their working on the film, etc. So lovely. For example, Jacqueline Stewart and Dee Rees speak about the importance of this film, especially how it was regarded critically afterwards, upon its release, and subsequently in terms of again what is referred to in terms of queer cinema and LGBTQ examinations and life journeys that are expressed in cinema in a very powerful and intimately told way, and how this is also expressed, I think, inherently in the filmmaking style, or the real beautiful, poetic, and humane eye that Dee Rees, as a filmmaker and artist and poet, devotes to all the characters that are part of PARIAH, and indeed all the other films that Dee Rees has made. So as an example, the conversation then goes to, for instance, Kim Wayans, who gives one of the great performances. Her performance, Kim Wayans as Audrey, the mother, it's magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. And we get her perspective on the character of Audrey. Again, she doesn't see her as a villain. She sees her story as being not wholly without any type of potential for sympathy. On the contrary, she understands Audrey's story. Now, it might lead to certain aspects that could be said to be there might have been issues in how she was expressing that. That's for sure, and that led to various significant ramifications, especially vis-a-vis her relationship with her husband, and also relationship with her daughter. But her feelings are, again, what are being spoken about here between Kim Wayans and Dee Rees. And Dee Rees says something really wonderful. She loves how Kim Wayans, according to her, she understood the character immediately. And she understood that this was someone that had this sense of almost kind of dignity, as it were. Again, how she expresses that might be a different issue entirely, but still there's a sense of dignity about her character. And I love that approach, because it means, or as an example of how Dee Rees is really giving, and the artists all who are involved are really giving their all when they're talking about the devotion to the stories of each of these individuals, including Audrey. So that is a wonderful. And also, there's a great comment about how Kim Wayans maybe she had a reputation, right, as a comedic actress, and so for her perspective to be able to have this very strong dramatic role is something that she expresses a lot of gratitude to Dee Rees for. So it's a wonderful aspect of this conversation. And another turn is when it turns to Charles Parnell and his interactions with the film, and also how he used to live in the area in which the film is set in Brooklyn. And so he remarks about how the shooting, the production shooting was in fact, I think, a few blocks from where he used to live. And so that was a wonderful coming home type of experience for him. And they also speak about the short film, and about the importance of distilling the essence of the story that goes all the way back to the short film. And this also brings in the discussion from the great Adepero Oduye and Pernell Walker and their performances, and how their relationship is one of the key aspects of the short film and also this feature-length film. And so they really had to get to the essence. One of the great phrases that's spoken here, it's not about the lines, it's about the relationships. I love this so much. And so they have this sense of who they are and capturing who they are, which is the key part of the overall expressive nature of this work, Pariah, and Dee Rees's work overall. There's also a mentioning of a very key difference in terms of a very dramatic scene that takes place in the story of Pariah. There's a key difference in terms of the version that was at the Sundance Lab stage versus the final feature-length film. There's a real key difference about a confrontation that occurs between two characters. How one character, that the confrontation is between two characters in the Sundance Lab version, but then in the feature film version, it takes place actually with a different character. So that is a really interesting choice. And in fact, the feature film length version choice is one that I find so powerful and so dramatic and devastating in terms of its consequences, but also in terms of the overall journey of Alike as a human being. I find it's very devastating. It's also potentially very liberating, and so that choice is so important. And I love how that detail is included here. So, and there are other details as well. Asha Davis speaks about the nature of her story and the Bina character, and the way that she was experiencing, say, the critical reactions to the film, and also to her character story arc as well. Pernell Walker talks about some really lovely anecdotes about how her performance, and this brings me to a discussion, or highlighting a part of the discussion here about how Dee Rees was also trying to emphasize how this was a story. This is a story, and how maybe she was experiencing some critical reactions that maybe critics were thinking that Dee Rees was capturing something through a type of documentary style film, and Dee Rees was saying how she had to very politely correct some of these critical assertions and say to them that, no, this is a story, and these are actors who are portraying characters that I created in terms of my script. And so that shows, I think, certain power in terms of the way in which Dee Rees is telling her story. It also shows a type of the way in which these performances are really very very powerful, and indeed to see these performers come together in this lovely, friendly, intimate way, again, it's so heartwarming. Incredibly heartwarming indeed. Also, something that Charles Parnell in particular makes reference to, about how this is a story about this young black woman in this particular situation in school, and also dealing with the characters or the friends that she has, Laura, the new people that she meets, Bina, her parents, etc. This is her story, and it's often described as being a film that is about a young black woman's experience, the African American experience. what Charles Parnell says here too is also very interesting. It is, yes, on the one hand, a story about this young black woman living in this particular part of the world and her life experiences. It is also a story that is touching upon, it has a universal sense about it, but it never loses sight of its intimate story, while at the same time creating a sense of space where people from all walks of life can come and can engage with the story. And Charles Parnell has a wonderful anecdote that speaks to this particular point, and how this is a story about a young black woman and her family. This is also a story which is about an American family. This is a story about a family. And so how it has these universal themes that are also very much in line with, or that touch upon very deeply and very profoundly with the African American experience. And so that way in which he expresses it, Charles Parnell does here, as well as Dee Rees here and others, is so well taken, so well said. So for these and other reasons, please check out this conversation. It's really well worth it. And then we go to another conversation, another Zoom call. This time we have, it's called Making of Pariah Department Heads. And now we have participating here Dee Rees and also Bradford Young, and also Inbal Weinberg and Nikisa Cooper and Mako Kamitsuna. And you're talking about the production aspects here. And it's another wonderful gathering, a reunion of sorts, of the participants. This time the crew, or certain members of the crew, coming together, approximately 39 minutes. So we have wonderful discussions from, say, the cinematographer Bradford Young, and he shares with us the philosophy about working with Dee Rees in that wonderful collaborative working professional relationship, and how she inspires him and how he inspires her, and how she witnessed the way he could create light, this beautiful source of light out of virtually nothing, out of thin air. And that is the craft and power of the cinematographer, in particular Bradford Young's art. And Bradford Young was talking too about, and also this was mentioned too by Jacqueline Stewart and Dee Rees and Bradford Young, about the way in which one of the really important aspects which they bring up, which is the way in which light and cinematography is very important from their filmmaking perspective, in order to capture and to represent and to portray African American characters and the look, and very subtle yet fundamentally important details, such as the way that light reflects off of the surface of the skin, for example, and how this is so important, and how the portrayal of this was so crucial in maintaining the dignity of these characters, again from the perspective of embodying or portraying the story from their the racial and ethnicity perspective, and how this type of capturing was very important in order to maintain and preserve and portray the dignity. That this was something that Bradford Young and Dee Rees in particular were very much keen on. And they were speaking, Bradford Young in particular, about how they were, of course, acknowledging how they were, in their words, standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of the progress of, say, technology and the use of film and the use of lighting that they learned from the past filmmaking artist giants that came before them, and how this led the way into what they were trying to achieve in terms of capturing this particular essence in the cinematography itself, and also in terms of a poetic mood, because alongside this, or connected with this, is also the way that characters' faces and light interacts with them. This is so beautifully rendered and enriched by what we see in this visual environment. So these comments are profound. They go to something very deep, and they speak to the artistic power and the integrity of these artists and filmmakers. So wonderful aspect there. This spirit continues with, for example, comments from Ingbal Weinberg about the costume or production design, and about how this the production design was very much trying to get at the essence of the characters, expression of characters, and also the reality of situations. How there was a sense of the characters' external struggles that were portrayed in these production design details. For instance, Bina's room, how that had a certain look versus, say, Alike's room and her environment, and how the levels of the building in which they were shooting in had a certain distinct aspect to contributing to this atmosphere. Bina's room being, say, for instance, being shot at the high part of the building, which allowed a lot of sunlight in, versus Like's room, which was shot maybe in the lower parts of the building, etc. So it's a very interesting reflection on the character traits and developments. Nikisa Cooper, the producer, talks about her beginnings, how she entered into the film industry, which is very much similar to Dee Rees, how they had a certain corporate background leading up to their lives as filmmakers, producers, or directors, writers. It's really fascinating stuff, bringing all the elements together. Mako Kamitsuna, the editor, she speaks about how the editing process. Also, she brings such great details and observations. For example, she speaks about how, from her own background and perspective, she comes from, as she acknowledges, she comes from a very different place than Alike does in terms of the distance of their own specific biographical details. And yet, Mako Kamitsuna, on the other hand, she then expresses how, at the same time, she could identify so much with Alike's story, her story with her parents and her mother in particular, and how this therefore is a story that is told on such a strong universal level on the one hand, and it never loses sight of the individual poetic integrity of Alike's own personal story and journey. So that wonderful balance, as Mako Kamitsuna, the editor, expresses, is so wonderful. Also, she makes this great observation about there's a particular scene about Laura and her friends, and they play cards, they get together, and it's described as being, by others, as being a type of expression of the type of a butch lesbian group of friends or people that Laura is friends with. And yet at the same time, there are moments of real expressive beauty, and the expression of just letting their hair down and laughing and crying and showing their vulnerabilities, and how this meant so much to her as a viewer of this film. And so again, that was an example of something that maybe there might have been some distance in terms of their biographical details. Mako Kamitsuna says maybe she comes from a different place, and yet at the same time she could understand wholeheartedly what was at the heart and soul of this particular moment, and how that was an example. So well done. And so this is another great examination, another great discussion that these filmmakers have as they come together. Well done, well done. And then we have another supplement, which is Kara Keeling on this film, PARIAH. And this is approximately 15 minutes. And here we have Kara Keeling, and she speaks about the context and the significance of PARIAH, the film, within the framework of LGBTQ film history, and how it expresses these ideas in the context of society, in the context of race and ethnicity. Also, the expressions and explorations and thematic concerns dealing with the sexual identity of the various characters that are being portrayed here. Specifically, of course, the character of Alike, and the idea or the notions about how this is part of that framework or fabric of cinematic. The cinematic journey, or the cinematic road, in terms of what she describes as being black lesbian cinema or black queer cinema, that also saw some very important foundational expressions in earlier works such as Cheryl Dunye's work, Watermelon Woman, etc., and how this has, on the one hand, many links to those past landmark cinematic traditions in terms of expressions, and also the way in which this film, Pariah, has a poetic voice that is also linked to those past cinematic traditions. And the idea, too, about the production details and how that influenced or was either a proponent of or detriment to how a film like Pariah could find its voice and find its audience in terms of the distribution of this film, which ended up leading to the great attention that it got on the festival circuit and beyond. And so the great perspective that Kara Keeling brings here is also so much part of, it's very important. This is this aspect of the film in the context of this in this cinematic tradition is very it's very valuable. It's also very integral and very important, again, because it also is a reflective of Dee Rees and her position as a filmmaker, and also the film itself and the story that it's trying to tell. So well done. Please check out this conversation with Kara Keeling, approximately 15 minutes. So with that, my friends, we also have the insert and leaflet here, which is a fold-out type. And so I'm not the biggest fan of the fold-out type, but I'm always a fan of the essays. And here's another great essay by Cassie da Costa called Song of the Self. And I love this for a number of reasons. It goes into the various modes of the literature and poetry that are at the foundational heart of this film. It makes references to past filmmaking and filmmaker traditions. It also makes reference to Dee Rees and her artistic capabilities as a filmmaker in this film Pariah, but also in her subsequent films such as Mudbound and others, and also centering in on the intimate intricacies and the delicate balances are at the heart and center of the story of Alike and others here. All in all, a wonderful essay, Song of the Self. Please check it out if you can. So, my dear friends, this is the release from Criterion of Pariah, the film by Dee Rees. So it's a really splendid, beautiful, powerful work. Please check it out if you can. Thank you very much, my dear friends. So that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please continue to be happy and healthy and well. And please, please, please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.